the urgent question. Anthony Magnol.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To ask the Secretary of State for Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Affairs if she will make a statement on Bosnia and Herzegovina and the potential of a renewed conflict in the Western Balkans.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend for his interest in the current situation in Bosnia-Herzegovina, and he's right to highlight this situation. The recent political developments are of significant concern to the UK government. Milorad Dodik, the Bosnian Serb member of the presidency, has threatened to withdraw Republika Srpska, the entity, from a range of state institutions, and this is an act which the High Representative calls a de facto secession. This is a dangerous and deliberate attempt to distract from the failure to improve standards of living and tackle corruption. It is unacceptable. The UK fully supports the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Bosnia-Herzegovina. After the devastating conflict of the 90s, the region has lived in peace for 26 years, and the Dayton political system, which should have been used to deliver progress and development for citizens, has been exploited by politicians who are focused on building and maintaining their own position. We recognise the important role that EUFOR Peace and Stabilisation Forces played and welcome the renewal of its mandate, an important deterrent against those malign actors who wish to see instability on Europe's doorstep. We work hard in the Security Council to ensure that it authorised EUFOR mandate for a further 12 months. The UK continues to play an active role. My honourable friend, the Europe Minister, was in Bosnia-Herzegovina in the summer to support this work. The High Representative will visit the UK for meetings in December. The UK is in close contact with him to ensure we are working in cooperation and giving him vocal support, including for the use of executive powers should the situation require it. This is a further check and balance for the destabilising actions in Bosnia-Herzegovina. The upcoming NATO Foreign Ministers meeting, the Foreign Secretary will push for more focus and resource on Bosnia and Herzegovina and the need to rebuff Russia's actions. The international community also has collective responsibility to ensure there is no return to the conflict of the 1990s. Along with our international partners, we're ensuring the High Representative's position and work is secured, and we'll continue to urge Russia to return to productive engagement with the Peace Implementation Council's steering board. Along with our international partners, we're working to tackle the divisive rhetoric and actions from some politicians in Bosnia and Herzegovina, including the threats to re-establish a Republika Srpska army and to pull out of other established state-level institutions. The UK is committed to helping the people of Bosnia and Herzegovina build a better future in a stable and prosperous state with strong institutions. We support the NATO HQ in Sarajevo, including through the secondment of UK staff officers who play an important role in building the capacity of the armed forces, and we are providing capacity building and expertise to those actors who demonstrate genuine commitment to progress.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For almost 30 years, we have been engaged in the Balkans, and until recently in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And in December last year, we withdrew from Operation Althea, the international stabilisation force in the country. The decision to withdraw came just as Bosnia was about to be put under the worst possible pressure by Bosnian Serb successionist leaders. And in the words of the High Representative, Christian Smith, who reported to the UN Security Council last week, Bosnia and Herzegovina faces the greatest existential threat of the post-war period, and the prospects for further division and conflict are very real. And ignoring and downplaying this state of affairs could have a perilous impact for the region and beyond. The successionists, Mr. Speaker, are operating with the support of Russia, as we saw in the Security Council meeting last week, and Serbia, as is evident from the joint military exercises held over the last few weeks between Bosnian and Serb forces. This is a dangerous situation in a country where ethnic cleansing and genocide were perpetuated in the 1990s. So with this in mind, can the Minister tell the House that it is still government policy that the redrawing of borders in the Balkans was finished in the 1990s and that it will not accept any successionist adventurism? Secondly, that the EUFOR presence on the ground in Bosnia is hardly sufficient to respond to any security challenge with only 700 troops on the ground and with inadequate equipment. What consideration has been given to redeploying UK forces in support of EUFOR and through NATO? And thirdly, what consideration has been given to impose sanctions on anyone undermining the Dayton Peace Accords, in line with the US, but sadly lacking from the EU and the UK? Mr. Speaker, in an article written last week by the Nobel Baroness Hellich, she quotes the UN Secretary General Kofi Annan commenting on the Bosnian genocide in 2000. The most important lesson, he said, was that we must recognise evil for what it is and confront it not with expediency and compromise, but with implacable resistance. Now is the time for us to act and not for us to wait, because if we fail to do so, we will only further to weaken the international rules-based order, embolden our enemies, but we will also see death and destruction rage again in our backyard.
Minister?
Mr. Speaker, I reflect on the passion with which my honourable friend puts forward the case, and he is completely right. The period of borders being redrawn in this region is behind us. We saw the devastating conflicts of the 1990s, and nobody should seek or be willing to go back to that period of time. We do support EUFOR. I beg his indulgence that I'm not going to speculate on what a future stabilisation of military force composition might be like, but as I have said, my right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, will be raising this issue in the strongest terms at the NATO Foreign Ministers meeting in Riga shortly. With regards to our commitment to NATO, as I say, we do support the NATO headquarters in Sarajevo. He asks about sanctions, and he will know that it's a long-standing policy of the UK government not to speculate on future sanctions designations for fear that doing so might undermine their effectiveness. But we are absolutely determined to ensure that the peace that this region has enjoyed for the last quarter of a century is maintained.
Shadow Minister Wayne David.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I congratulate the member for Totnes and South Devon on securing this urgent question. Today, the situation in Bosnia and Herzegovina is extremely serious. I visited Bosnia and Herzegovina in 2013 as part of a delegation with the British group of the Interparliamentary Union. I well remember our chaperone in Sarajevo telling me how she had been shot in the leg by a sniper in the 1990s when she was a small child. We do not want those dark days to return. At the time of my visit in 2013, the situation was precarious, with the Dayton Agreement being widely seen as a holding operation. It did not really provide a way forward, but it did help keep a lid on the conflict. Now the situation is undoubtedly dangerous. The Dayton Agreement is under serious strain, with a very real risk that the country will fragment and conflict will once again erupt. There is the distinct possibility that the President of the Republika Srpska, one of the two autonomous elements of Bosnia and Herzegovina, will withdraw from the federal Bosnian army and create a separate force. With the threat of Serb withdrawals from other state institutions, the situation is extremely serious. Serious not only for Bosnia, but as the EU's High Representative has said, there could be implications throughout the Western Balkans if the situation deteriorates in Bosnia and Herzegovina. My questions to the Minister are, firstly, what pressure is the UK government applying internationally to prevent the Serbs in Republika Srpska from fracturing the Bosnian army and the institutions of the Bosnian Herzegovina state? Secondly, what representations has the UK government made to China and Russia for them to adopt a more constructive attitude towards Bosnia and Herzegovina? And every effort must be made to insist that all ethnic groups continue to work together? And thirdly, what cooperation is there between the UK and our EU allies to ensure that the EU's 700-strong peacekeeping operation EUFOR plays an effective role in helping to maintain peace during the coming months?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman opposite makes some incredibly important points, and in many respects I echo the concerns that he has raised at the dispatch box. With regard to working with our international partners, which go to the core of the questions that he has asked, we maintain a close engagement with EUFOR, although having left the European Union, we are no longer formally part of it. But alongside the United States of America, we pushed for the mandate renewal, and we're very pleased that that was successful, and we will continue to support them. The key institution here is the High Representative, Mr. Christian Schmidt, and we will continue to lobby in support of the work that he is doing on the international stage. But the honourable gentleman is absolutely right that we have to prevent the fragmentation of this country, because that will almost inevitably be the precursor to further conflict. And many of us in this House have seen the genuine horror that conflict in this region brings, and we must work together with our international partners to do everything we can to deter that from happening.
James Gray.
Speaker, I call attention to my entry in the Regiment's interest with regard to a recent visit to Bosnia as part of the all-party parliamentary group for the armed forces. Mr. Speaker, is it not extraordinary? The whole House, I'm sure, will be amazed that the trigger for the current instability in Bosnia-Herzegovina is that the High Representative brought in a law outlawing genocide deniers. The last place in the world where genocide can be denied is Republika Srpska, and all the High Representative did was to say that's now outlawed. Will my right honourable friend not agree with me that actually behind all of this lies Russia, and lies Serbia itself, and unless we do something very dramatic and very serious and very urgent about it, we are facing a return to the kind of chaos that we saw in Bosnia-Herzegovina in the late 80s and early 90s. We really have to act really seriously in this thing. We're facing a catastrophe, a disaster in Bosnia, and just saying we'll think about it is no good at all.
Minister.
My honourable friend sadly is right that we do see the hand of Russia at play here, and we need to work with the High Representative and our international partners to ensure that there is not a fragmentation. And he is right that it is unacceptable to deny Holocaust in whichever arena it occurred. But for many of us, this is the event which was a significant part of our lives, and is one that we have to ensure is not repeated.
MP's spokesperson Anderson Thoulas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Remember Srebrenica tweeted earlier that today in 1993 saw the destruction of the historic bridge in Mostar, a poignant reminder of the conflict, the genocide and living memory, and our thoughts should be very much with the people who live there and fear a return to the types of horrors they have seen in the past. What steps will the Minister take to ensure that the UK plays its part in securing peacekeeping efforts as needed? We welcome very much that the UN mandate to EUFOR was renewed last week, and it must be seen to be fulfilled. Can you tell us a bit more about the discussions he's had with the key regional partners in the EU, the US, and leaders in Bosnia and Herzegovina itself? If the situation deteriorates further, then we risk a return to the sectarianism of the past, the violence to civilians that entails, and we risk emboldening Russian influence in the region. So can you tell us more about what steps he's going to take on a multilateral level to ensure the UK plays its part alongside regional allies, to ensure that existing frameworks are managed in a way that protects the settlement within the country? And lastly, are there any considerations about the nature of the UK's role in supporting EUFOR specifically, and what contingency plans is he making should we require to be brought into that?
Minister.
I thank the honourable lady for the questions that she has asked. Specifically with regard to EUFOR, as I said, the UK and the United States of America were supportive vocally in our support of the mandate renewal. We're very pleased that that has happened. Although we are not formally a member of EUFOR, we have seconded staff officers to support the capability building work, and we have given direct support to the Bosnia and Herzegovina armed forces that are an essential part of the security framework. As I said, my right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, will speak at the upcoming NATO Foreign Ministers meeting and push for more focus and resource on Bosnia and Herzegovina and the collective need to push back against Russia's actions in the area. With regard to what we might do next, that will need to be a collective decision by the international community, because working in accord with each other is the only way that we are going to make a meaningful progress on this. But I can assure her that this is and will remain a very clear focus for UK foreign policy in the region.
Bob Seeley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my right honourable friend for calling this question. As somebody who spent time in Yugoslavia during the 1990 wars, I do not underestimate how unpleasant this could get, how violent and how quickly. I want to look at Russia. We know they've been selling arms to the ethnic Serbian police. We know they have formed and handing out passports to people in conflict areas as a reason for intervention. We also know that there is now significant potential that European Union forces will come into direct conflict with Russian proxies there. Is he aware of the true danger of this situation? But also it follows a pattern, not only in the Western Balkans, but in eastern Ukraine and now on the Belarusian border. We are being significantly tested. NATO, the European Union, is being significantly tested. Do we have a policy?
Minister.
I thank the honourable gentleman for the points he's made, and my honourable and gallant friend, I recognise the contribution that he has made and his understanding of the issues in this region, and he is right that those of us who remember some of the headlines and images that came out of this region not that long ago are horrified at the prospect that it might slip back into that level of violence. My honourable friend, the member for Aldridge Brownhills, visited the region extensively earlier on this year, and she and our officials are well aware of the circumstances on the ground, and we will, as I say, continue working with our international partners, both European partners and NATO partners, to do everything we can to prevent this slipping back into the kind of horrific sectarian bloodshed that we saw, sadly, only 26 years ago.
Sir Tony.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I would also congratulate the Honourable Member on this. We know how quickly things can deteriorate in the Balkans, and the kind of bloodshed, the flight of refugees that we've seen in the past will be with us if we see secession by Republika Srpska. I've got to put it to the Minister that he said nothing really about what our red lines are. It's not enough to wait for secession. The steps that Prime Minister Dodik is talking about now are steps to secession. We've got to make our red lines clear. We've got to make them clear to Russia. We've got to make them clear to Serbia, as well as to Prime Minister Dodik. In that context, can I say to him that U4 is simply has no capacity to be the peacekeepers if things deteriorate. We've got now to have a strategy for Bosnia and Herzegovina.
The honourable gentleman makes an important point, and we recognise that U4 is there to do a particular role, and we would, of course, all collectively much prefer that we prevent a return to violence rather than having to deal with a return to violence. If there is an escalation, and we will work hand in glove with our international partners to try and prevent that, that would need to be something that would be discussed at the NATO Foreign Ministers meeting, and any red lines put forward would need to be done in conjunction with our international friends and allies. But I completely take the broader point that he was making about the need to work collectively to prevent this slipping back into violence.
James.
Mr. Speaker, as a Bosnia veteran, I'm very familiar with that country. I went there recently, and I know for a fact that fears about security are justified. Britain signed the Dayton Agreement in 1995, so we are part of the solution. Is it time perhaps for another ministerial visit to Sarajevo?
My honourable and gallant friend, I think makes an important point about the need for visible support to the institutions which have helped keep the peace for such a long time. As I said, my honourable friend, the member for Aldridge Brownhills, went recently. I'm not in a position where I can commit to exactly when a future ministerial visit will be, but as I say, my right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, will be bringing this up at NATO Foreign Ministers in Riga in the near future. I have no doubt that this will be the location for a future ministerial visit in the not too distant future.
That's sharp.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I first thank the member for Totnes and South Devon for securing this question. The world can't make the same mistakes again. In 1995 genocide, over 8,000 Muslim men and boys were killed in one single day. The US Deputy Assistant Secretary of State, Gabriel Escobar, told Congress last week that the US is working with the EU to make sure that there are consequences for any illegal or destabilising actions in Bosnia. And I appreciate the member leading this UQ asked the question what representations have made, and the Minister answered that they will be making them at Riga shortly. My concern, and I think it's rightly and fairly held, is that given what we had in Afghanistan and the government was asleep at the wheel, is the government asleep at the wheel again on this one? Why haven't we already made representations, and what representations, if any, have we already made to the EU and world partners and NATO?
Mr. Speaker, I think the Honourable Lady is frankly wrong in her assessment. This is not a question about Afghanistan, but she will know that we started the evacuation process in Afghanistan in the spring of this year, long before the fall of Kabul. I have already said that in conjunction with our European partners and the United States of America, we made representations at the Security Council to renew the U4 mandate. That is an important and significant piece of work that we've done in conjunction with our international partners. We have made public statements and actions of support to the High Representative, Mr. Schmidt, and we will continue to do so. And as I said, the Foreign Secretary, my right honourable friend, will be bringing this issue up at the NATO Foreign Ministers meeting in Riga. What else we might do will, of course, be defined by the circumstances, but I can assure her, you, sir, and the House that this will remain a focus for Her Majesty's Government.
Thank you,
Speaker. I'd like to thank the Prime Minister, the Foreign Secretary and the Defence Secretary for their time on this issue. Indeed, colleagues, over the last few weeks, where there have been many conversations ongoing. Dojic has but one goal, and that is the destruction and failure of the Bosnian state. Now, as chair of the APPG for Bosnia, I've invited the High Representative to visit Parliament. I hope, Mr. Speaker, you will join us when we meet with him as parliamentarians from across the House. The time for diplomacy is now, so that we do not have to have this conversation again, because we are able to ride over the crisis. Will the Minister please consider activating the conflict centre, reviewing all CSSF programmes to see whether it's actually fit for purpose, and work with the Defence Minister to increase our deployment to NATO Sarajevo and consider joint cross-Balkan deployments and missions?
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Lady again speaks with great passion, but more importantly, perhaps authority and experience on this issue, and I pay tribute to the work that she and the other members of the APPG do. I can assure her that the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office is looking seriously at what administrative structures need to be in place for us to respond to an escalation of the situation here. Obviously, our priority is to try and prevent an escalation. I'm very glad that she has extended an invitation to the High Representative, because public, visible support to the work that he does is incredibly important, both from government but also from Parliament. And I echo her calls that this should be done internationally and not just here in the UK.
We now go to Jamie Stone.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure that many others like me regret that the late Paddy Ashton is not with us here today, because he would have a lot to say as an expert. There has been much talk, Mr. Speaker, about the tilt to the Indo-Pacific, and yet, as others have said, Russia and possibly China are not hesitating to get involved in European affairs. In our own backyard, as already referred to. So I wonder, can I ask the Minister this? Is our poise, our defence poise, possibly wrong in terms of the tilt to the Indo-Pacific? Perhaps we should be concentrating on our own backyard. And secondly, I've spoken before about defence cuts and the cut in the size of the army. I wonder if I can tempt the Minister to agree with me that this is no time to be cutting the size of our armed forces.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman is right to highlight the work of the Lord Late Ashdown, and indeed it was remiss of me, and I should have actually paid tribute to him in the opening statement I made, because he was incredibly influential in the work that he did, and I think the whole House should recognise that. I won't be drawn on the size of the armed forces, but I will make the point that the Indo-Pacific tilt as set out in the integrated review, it should not be read as an exclusive focus on that part of the world, but rather an additional focus. We absolutely recognise that the security of this region and our own peace and security are interwoven, and he is right to highlight that, and that is why I can assure him that we will work both diplomatically with our international friends and colleagues, and as I say, at the conversations that we have with NATO foreign ministers shortly in Riga, to look collectively at what our response might need to be. But ultimately, the win, I think, would be to put pressure on Republika Srpska not to go down this separatist path.
Martin Vickers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the Prime Minister's trade envoy to the Western Balkans, I've made 2 recent visits to Bosnia-Herzegovina. Indeed, I was in Sarajevo on Thursday and Friday of last week. And there is no doubt that there has been a significant increase in tensions. And I pay tribute to our ambassador and his excellent team over there, who are working to reduce those tensions, but also to develop our economic ties and develop the economy of the country to the benefit of all of the people there, particularly the young people who are leaving the country in enormous numbers. Can I urge the Minister to continue his work with colleagues in the Department of International Trade so that we can develop our economic ties, not just with Bosnia-Herzegovina, but the whole of the Western Balkan region? And would he urge politicians of all descriptions over there to work together? They can seize the moment now for peace and prosperity.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman is absolutely right that international trade is a force for good and a force for peace. I paraphrase, and I'm sure every member of the House is familiar with it, when goods cross borders, soldiers do not. And ultimately, we all have an interest in the economic stability and prosperity of this region, and actually there is a belief that it's a failure in the economic opportunities for people in this region that is a big driving force for the actions of Republika Srpska. So in direct answer to his question, I will continue to push for increased trade with the Western Balkans and Bosnia and Herzegovina, because it is to the benefit of both us and them that continues.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Minister, I was in Bosnia a few weeks ago with the APPG Armed Forces, and I was genuinely shocked that the segregation of communities felt worse than it was in the 80s, with some schools even teaching that the genocide of Bosnian Muslims didn't exist. So can he explain why we seem to be shifting our development money away from stability? Can he also tell us what he's doing to safeguard the investment we've already made in that country for peaceful dialogues and tolerance? And can he also consider embedding atrocity prevention into all of our embassies to prevent this happening in other countries?
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Lady, as always, puts forward thoughtful ideas, and I will pay close attention to the final point that she has made. It is essential that we never allow the genocide that happened to be forgotten. We must never allow that to be forgotten, and we must ensure through the diplomatic work that that is not expunged from the curriculum of young people in this country. We will seek to work with our international friends and partners, as I've said, to prevent this slipping into conflict. But if we are successful at that, we still have to go further and ensure that our diplomatic efforts are focused on bringing communities together. Money does play a part of that, I recognise that, but in this context I think our diplomatic heft is probably of greater impact than our ODA contributions.
Mr. Abdali.
I congratulate my honourable friend for securing this urgent question. The secessionists, having denied the genocide and also trying to discredit the post-war Bosnian state, have created a crisis which could get violent. And I know the Minister has offered commitment, but no doubt the Minister has heard from the people in the Chamber today. We want that dialed up to become a priority, whether it's challenging the EU's failure, putting pressure on China and Russia, or even making troops available, not just to protect, but to collect evidence of any atrocities that may take place. There is a red line that the Minister can make right here, right now. The ministers have repeatedly said we only recognise genocide when it's declared by the UN. The UN has declared a genocide. And when the High Commissioner's office said that anyone that denied the genocide would be committed to a sentence, perhaps the Minister can say that we stand behind that statement too.
Minister, you're going to have to speed up.
I appreciate that, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend will know that the UK has zero tolerance for Holocaust denial in wherever it comes about. I can assure her we will continue working with our international friends to ensure that the Republic of Srpska understand that their actions are unacceptable and there will be consequences if they continue.
Stephen Parry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I worked in Bosnia in the late 1990s with political parties and civil society. Does the Minister recognise that one of the downsides of the data agreement was that it institutionalised political difference and crowded out any multi-ethnic voices from the political space? And as a consequence of that, what more can the government do today to support civil society, especially that based on a multi-ethnic basis, to have a more powerful voice to combat the forces of division within Bosnia?
Mr. Speaker, I understand the point the honourable gentleman makes about the Dayton Accords, the Dayton Agreement. They do serve an important function in underpinning peace. I don't think were ever envisaged to be the permanent structural solution to this situation, but ultimately at the moment the High Representative and his work is where our focus is in the here and now, and the future evolution of a political and social structure in Bosnia and Herzegovina is something that we'll need to look at once we've resolved this current issue.
Scott Bent.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The breakup of Bosnia and Herzegovina would create massive instability in that region, which would not be in the best interests of neighbouring countries such as Serbia. Can my right honourable friend confirm that the government is engaging with Belgrade to encourage leaders in that region to make sure that that wider instability, which would be so damaging, is not borne out?
My honourable friend makes an incredibly important point that this is not a situation where countries in the region will be disinterested. And of course we do have active bilateral conversations with countries in the region. My honourable friend, the member for Aldridge Brown Hills, I know has been there and is very active, and we will continue to do so because, as he says, the instability in Bosnia and Herzegovina is not something that anyone, either here in the UK or in the region, wishes to see again.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Stephen from my constituency of Weaver Vale was a peacekeeper in the past. He saw firsthand the genocide in the Balkans on our doorstep. The Minister referred to close cooperation with UFO. What are the details? What does that cooperation involve?
As I've said, the UK is not formally a member of UFO, having left the European Union, but we do have secondees into the headquarters, NATO headquarters in Sarajevo, and we have been very supportive of the mandate renewal. Exactly what future support may be required, we'll have to decide depending on the circumstances at the time, but I can assure him and the House that we do stay very much focused on ensuring peace in this region.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker, and I congratulate my honourable friend for Totnes for securing this urgent question. Some years ago I visited Bosnia and Herzegovina with the now Lord Parkinson of Whitley Bay as part of the Westminster Foundation for Democracy programme. Can I ask the Minister to ensure that the UK government will oppose all attempts to redraw borders, and alongside the sadly necessary consideration of hard power and sanction options, will he also do all he can to continue to dial up all the soft power levers at our disposal to help pressure those who would seek to damage the fragile peace in Bosnia?
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend makes an incredibly important point that we would much prefer to resolve this situation through diplomatic efforts and persuasion rather than through force. That will be the focus of our work, and we will do so in conjunction with our international partners.
Thank you. On the 14th of October, Dodik said that he'd forced the Bosnian army to withdraw from Republika Srpska by surrounding its barracks if the West tried to intervene. He said he had friends who had promised to support the Serb cause, a presumed reference to Serbia and Russia, who are both seeking to undermine the role and the authority of the High Representative, and this is a massive test for NATO. So does he agree that it is crucial for us to bolster the office of High Representative, get NATO on the same page with a solution, and to tell Russia in no uncertain terms that we will not accept the breakup of Bosnia and Herzegovina?
Mr. Speaker, I have to confess I find myself in complete accord with the points that the honourable gentleman has made.
Dr. Abbott.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister will know that the situation is obviously very worrying, and if it quickly deteriorates into conflict, the inevitable consequence of that would be a refugee crisis on the scale we saw, hopefully not, of a few decades ago. But that would put enormous pressure on neighbouring countries, and it seems to me, therefore, that the government, all international governments are between a rock and a hard place on this. But one thing we can do is start preparing contingency plans with neighbouring countries how to deal with a potential refugee crisis.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman is right that ultimately whatever resolution either to this attempted breakup of Bosnia and Herzegovina or of a potential refugee crisis needs to be done in conjunction with the countries in the region. That's why my honourable friend, the member for Aldridge Brownhills, has been active, and I have no doubt will continue to be active, speaking with all the countries in the region.
Margaret Farrell.
Speaker, the Srebrenica massacre in 1995, the worst atrocity on European soil since World War II, was a horrific incidence of genocide that cannot be repeated. Dodik has alluded to alliances with China, Russia and Hungary, who could provide support should conflict break out. What assessment has the Secretary of State made of the likelihood and impact of these countries intervening in the region?
Mr. Speaker, we're aware of, as I say, we're aware of the likely hand of Russia in this. We will ensure that we continue with a dynamic assessment of the situation on the ground, and ultimately we will work with the member states of the European Union as well as the United States of America to do everything we can to ensure this does not escalate once again to the violence that we saw sadly in the 90s.
We come to the next urgent question. November Bishop.
Mr. Speaker, to ask the Secretary of State